Stoned and alone. It's the worst place to be. Although I guess being alone and not stoned is probably worse than that. Radical Russ with your live 420 radio coverage of the High Times Cannabis Cup in the Bay Area. Joining us now at the desk, we've got Jon Gettman, who I don't know exactly your affiliation now. I know you used to work with Normal, did a lot of work with Normal for them, but...
Well, I've worked with just about everybody at some point in the last 25, 30 years, but right now I'm getting a lot of support from High Times, and we put together a new website called regulatingcannabis.com, and that's really what I'm here to talk about today.
Fantastic. I first became acquainted with your work where you had, prior to legalization, estimated how much money we would make and how much money we would save in law enforcement resources thanks to legalizing. Now that you've seen 6 months of retail legalization in Colorado, has it matched what your expectations would have been?
In some respects, in a really general sense.
Yeah.
We really don't have the full numbers yet. What I found most fascinating was actually when, as part of the preparation in Washington, when they tried to estimate the size of the market, they finally realized they had to go past the government survey, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, and so the RAND Corporation did an independent survey of what we are now calling consumers, and they found out that they had to really double their estimate of how much marijuana the market really accounted for every year. And I found that fascinating because I've been accused by some people of overestimating the market,
right.
and those are fair criticisms. I mean, we really have little data to work on, but the big trend over the last 25, 30 years is that every now and then the government comes along and says, oh my gosh, we just got new information and it's a lot bigger than we thought it was yesterday. Mm-hmm. And so we get these tip of the iceberg moments in estimation, and that little survey in Washington was another one. So we are learning a lot more about the real market based on real data as opposed to really general projections or guesstimates or what have you. So I do think we're going to learn an awful lot from these two states, and even more so when Oregon and California and Alaska and other states start to follow.
Yeah, and let's hope they all start to follow real quickly here. Now, Jon Gettman is our guest right now, and you were talking about your new website because let's lead in from where we just were as far as getting this information out and getting some realistic surveys and studies and prognosis for how legalization should go. Is that part of what Regulate Cannabis is about, doing the supplying data for people, data store?
Yes, but just to split hairs, it's regulating cannabis.
No, let's get it right. Regulatingcannabis.com.
Yeah, getting more data out is definitely part of it. In fact, the main feature of the website right now is a white paper. It's an extremely detailed exploration of what principles ought to guide regulations for legal cannabis. But part of that is backing up those assertions with data. And for example, there's a little factoid buried away in the national in the NIDA national survey. Russ, let me ask you, how many people grow marijuana for personal use?
How many are growing for personal use? I know there's like 28 million are using. I'd say got to be 20% or 5% of them maybe grow?
Well, and just in terms of sheer numbers, and by the way, national survey comes along, hire from the government, want to ask you an hour and a half worth of questions about drug use. It's a baseline. But we have data there that you can say that based on this NIDA survey, we got 500,000 people that are growing marijuana primarily for their own use. Very, very small percentage say, yeah, I'm selling a little bit of that. But right there we have a bedrock 500,000 people. Personal use. We also get data from the national survey about how many people, again, acknowledge to a government survey that they sell illegal drugs.
Right.
And that's fascinating because when you get into the 12 to 17-year-old group, we find out that out of maybe 2 million kids who smoke pot, 400,000 admit to selling illegal drugs, which means 1 out of 4 teenagers who probably uses pot, sells pot.
Yeah.
And this is a huge problem with the illegal market. I mean, not to get too wonky in all of this, but illegal market, high prices, incentives for people to sell to make profit. The problem with teenage marijuana use is not the guy at the schoolyard in the long coat saying, hey, little kid, come here, let me sell you some pot. No, it's kids selling pot to each other.
Right.
And as we get into the details about what people want to do with regulation, how they want to control it, one thing everybody agrees on is we want to shut down access or lower access of teenagers.
Sure.
And we got to take that profit incentive out of it to get rid of these teenage drug dealers.
Right.
Because they're the ones who are moving it around the schools. And say what you will about, well, tobacco's legal, but kids still use it, and alcohol's legal, but kids still use it. You don't have kids buying cartons of cigarettes and taking them to school and selling it to their friends to make money. They don't go in there with bottles of whiskey or cases of beer and selling off singles to their friends. This data is really important to backing up some of these, or countering some of these ideas about what regulation ought to look like. And that's two examples right there, the number of teenagers who sell drugs and the number of people who right now acknowledge that they grow marijuana for personal use.
You know, I have a stat on one of my slides from Joe Califano's CASA group where they surveyed, and they said 44% of kids know a kid at school who deals. 94% of the time they got marijuana on the menu, 6% cigarettes, 1% alcohol.
Yeah.
And I always follow that up with, there's just no profit in being a teenage tequila dealer.
No.
Not that kids don't drink tequila. It happens at parties and stuff.
I mean, you know, it's funny. In 7th grade is one of my big lessons about capitalism. A kid in one of my classes bought a bunch of candy, brought it to school, selling it to people before class. And I went, oh, I can do that too. But once both of us were doing it, you know, the market went down.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how much that's a factor in that. And again, data surveys, this time it's University of Michigan, it's called the Monitoring the Future study. 85% of high school seniors say marijuana is easy to get.
Yeah.
And they've been saying that's been the factoid every year since 1975. Might be 82, might be 87, might be 92. Kids find pot easy to get.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always, you know, one of the fear-mongering tactics that comes about is that if we legalize, there'll be more access for kids, there'll be more kids using it. And I say, no, kid use will probably stay the same or maybe drop a little, but it's the older guys that don't have a guy, you know, that's like, now we have a store to go to. We don't have to go search for a guy or find somebody in a parking lot or, you know, whatever.
Go back to the college yearbook and go, no, where was that?
Yeah, where was that guy?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Russ, because that's exactly what the survey data showed in the last 5 or 6 years. The number of people, let's just say, I used pot sometime in the last year. Let's take that little factoid. That's gone from 25 to close to 30 million in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And the growth has been in this older demographic. The actual number of teenage users has gone down.
Yeah.
In the last 5 years. So you know, the trend is if use does go up, it's going to be older people. Yeah,
I saw the one from the factoid from Rand, I think it was, that in 2000 there were 3 teenage smokers for every over 50 smoker. In 2010 it was 2.5 over 50s for every teenager.
Yeah,
it's just about flipped the demo.
Oh, and by the way, this figure of how many people grow for personal use, that's doubled in the last 10 years.
Oh wow!
So regardless of the actual number, that may be just a very lowball estimate. The trend is that personal cultivation is in a tremendous growth spurt in the last 10 years, and that's going to continue.
We're speaking with Jon Gettman from regulatingcannabis.com, and you know, when we talk about putting the teenage dealer out of business or the street corner dealer out of business, part of the argument we were kind of implying there was that the price has to come down for it to not be so profitable. Yet prohibition keeps the price abnormally high, unnaturally high, and it seems like some of these folks, the Klymans and some of these guys that are opining on it, want to keep that price high, which seems to me counter to our goal of taking the kids out of the business.
Well, first let me say Mark Kleiman has one goal in common with the marijuana reform movement, and that is he's very concerned about huge corporations coming over and taking over this business. But then we depart ways there in terms of how best to counter that. What Michael Kennedy and Michael's helped me write this white paper and laid out an extensive argument on public policy positions and points and context. We say, look, competition is the way to control the market, is a really competitive market. But let's back up a bit.
Okay.
The notion is that one of the appealing notions these days is that you've got to keep the price high. That when marijuana is legal, you've got to keep the price high to discourage consumption, which means they want to keep it a little lower than what it is now, but essentially the same as it is now. And they think that's going to keep people from smoking too much pot, and it's going to keep teenagers from using it. And the problem with that is that if marijuana is expensive, you're still going to have a black market. There's still going to be a profit incentive for people to sell it outside the regulatory system, and ultimately it's self-defeating from what we've been talking about. But in order to keep the price high, they say, look, there's two issues. They say they need to narrow the number of people. Only a limited number of people should be allowed to grow and sell marijuana, and there should be limits on advertising and marketing. Now, we're not opposed to limits on advertising and marketing, but the idea that commercialism, the capitalism, the competition is the problem here, we think that's misguided, and we think that you get a better market when you have standards about corporate social responsibility, when you have lots of competition, when you have different people with different strategies about how to reach the consumers and serve that market, when you have a competitive market with lots of entrants, lots of participation, attracting people and entrepreneurs, different types of cannabis, different quality, different amounts of service, different amounts of attention paid to consumer. We think that spreads the market around. We think that gives a lot of competition to, sure, large corporations are going to have a big share of the market, but we think there'll be an independent market that'll also keep those corporations in check. And also we think that a large market with lots of participants, it's a lot easier to create standards for this interesting phrase, corporate social responsibility, about using environmentally friendly cultivation techniques, about promoting safety, about promoting not using cannabis while driving, which is something the public is really concerned about, about creating ethics to go along with accountability about sales to minors and public education about the drug, and about protecting some populations that really shouldn't be using cannabis. Certain people with certain mental health problems, there's some concern about people who are predisposed towards schizophrenia or other types of psychosis, that cannabis is not a good drug to be floating around their brains. There are concerns that we think are best met by a huge competitive market. On the other hand, the model being pushed in a lot of places, and for example, this is the model in Washington State, is a limited market with only a few number of companies allowed to grow, only a few number of companies allowed to sell. We think in the long run that's going to not serve the public interest here. It's not about making money for a lot of people. It's about serving the public interest, and the public interest, to go back to that first little factoid I was putting out there, a lot of people grow pot for themselves now, and a lot of kids sell pot. People growing pot for themselves, that's not a problem. That's probably a good thing in the long run. Kids selling pot for profit in school, if we want to end teenage marijuana use, we've got to cut the availability, and we got to cut up that incentive for a kid to buy a half pound of pot and go sell 7 ounces to his buddies.
Yeah, exactly. And one last question about this, as we move forward, one of the other concerns that we hear from opponents is the political power that would be involved. They talk about how there's a big tobacco or big alcohol who oppose all taxes and new regulations and want to always push the envelope and try to market to kids. They often float this notion that in the alcohol industry, they have to make their money off the drunks, so they try to cultivate more drunks. Do you have any data or thoughts on that?
Oh, quite a bit. We go for a little segment on that, but let me tell you something. First of all, big tobacco, there is a big tobacco. There's only 7 companies that sell all the tobacco in this country, and they sell a processed product. Generic products are bad news for them. The idea that people could grow their own tobacco, or they can't, because the tobacco that is sold is a processed product. Marijuana, lots of people can grow marijuana. It's a generic product in the sense of it doesn't require processing, and so widespread marijuana cultivation provides competition for all of that. Second of all, look, I'm from Virginia, and we're really proud of our founding fathers, and we're really proud of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And Madison said, look, lots of different factions balance each other out. That protects freedom. And Jefferson said that people ought to be involved when the government creates policies that affect them. We think marijuana consumers ought to be involved in making regulations about the marijuana market. There shouldn't be this idea of an educated elite, whether it be college professors like me or college professors like Mark Kleiman or government bureaucrats. We don't think a narrow group of people ought to figure out, we think we know what's best and we're going to ram it down their throats. No, we need to get public support for good policies that balance all the public interests. And sure, there's going to be an industry. It's going to be capitalized. They're going to look after their interests. But we think the marijuana consumer ought to be part of this argument. And that's
Absolutely.
why we're out for a competitive market, a free market with open access, and something that's consumer friendly. Because one last thing I want to talk about here real quick. Look, there's a lot of things that are wrong with prohibition. But one of them, as far as money goes, is it costs governments a lot of money, and it extracts a lot of money from consumers. Well, proposals that say we're going to save the government money, but we're still going to extract all that money from the consumers, those proposals won't fly. We've got to bring the price down to a reasonable level. The era of people paying several $100s an ounce for pot has to end. And what legalization is about bringing the price down and getting this down to a normal market governed by normal economics with normal, reasonable regulations to protect everybody's interests.
Looking forward to that too. Jon Gettman with regulatingcannabis.com. Thanks for all the great work you've done over all these years.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you today.
All right, we're going to play some more music. Relax here at the Cannabis Cup. Thanks for joining us here for our 420 Radio live coverage of the High Times Cannabis Cup. Here's some money. No, let's go to Easy Star. Any color you like.